Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started in a minute. Maybe. Let's do this again. There we go. Now we can go live. Very, very good. Maybe. Let's do this again. Right. Very, very good. Dismiss. And we can do this. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Warren Nelson. I am known as the instructor. And have years and years and years of experience, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details of all my experience. However, almost 30 years in the business, ladies and gentlemen. Try not to give away my age too much if I can avoid it, but I have a long time in the business, lots of experience to share with my students, and I'm very happy to do this class every Monday to help the future generations of real estate agents. I love this fact that I am talking to the future, what's going to be happening in the days to come, and where you might be a year, 5 years, 20 years from now. So I want to welcome everybody to my live streaming class. This is a free class that I run every Monday, or at least I try to do it every Monday anyway, to help students who are looking to sign up for a school, to give them a little bit more research about what they can expect, what's going to be ahead of them, and why they need to be taking a 75-hour class in the state of Pennsylvania. What's real estate practice? What's real estate fundamental? Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to all my friends and families, my lovely wife in the Philippines. Love, I love you. Reach out to you and to all my friends and family in all the parts of the country and the world that I reach out to, which is a lot of places. So again, I wanted to say hello to everybody. Thank you very much for tuning into my show every Monday. And on with the show, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is not one of those typical YouTube videos that you do to try to get ratings or to try to get likes. However, I would like comments. So if you're tuning in now, then that says that you got that entrepreneur blood going through your veins. You're looking to get a little bit more information. Do me a favor, do some comments for me, and let me know that you're out there. So I appreciate that. So here's how this works, ladies and gentlemen. One of the first things that you should understand is the real estate school. And is that real estate school a registered real estate school? And so you can go to the Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs, or you could do real estate commission. You could put that in a search engine and check the school out. So one of the first things, good evening, Kayla. So one of the very first things that I always recommend, ladies and gentlemen, is that you check out the school by going to the Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs website for the state of Pennsylvania and see if the school is licensed, see if it's registered. They don't give a pass-fail ratio on this website, but at least you will know that you're working with a bona fide school that is registered with the state to offer this 75-hour class. And you can also verify the instructors and the locations as well. So I always recommend that in your research for a school, that you go to the Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs and check out that school, put the school's name in there and see if it is registered and it's legal. So that was one of the first things that I always recommend to my students in this research program that we are doing today. So the next thing is, why is it 75 hours? What is real estate practice and what is real estate fundamentals? And why does the state require that we have these two courses of learning? Now, here's the answer. Real estate fundamentals deals with the laws. And there's a lot of laws that go with the real estate arena. Federal law, and as of today, May 1st, a lot of those rules have changed, laws have changed, and this is why you have to do a continuing education class every 2 years, because the government's constantly changing things through administration after administration. So federal law, state law, local law, fair housing law, non-discrimination laws, who's protected, who's not protected in the protected class, 62 and over, for example. What is familiar status? Well, that is a parent with a child under the age of 18, a woman who is pregnant, somebody who's adopting a child. Well, that becomes a protected class under federal law and state law. And in the real estate arena, you need to understand the laws that affect your business, the real estate arena. So federal laws, state law, local law, and then there's a bunch of other laws like fair housing law. Let's talk about fair housing. Here's the law with fair housing and HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And Marcia Fudge is the current secretary of HUD. And that would be your federal boss in the real estate arena. So Marcia or Marcia Fudge, however you want to say it. I've seen it both ways. I believe it's Marcia Fudge, though, who is the secretary of HUD. Ben Carson was the secretary of HUD in the last administration. So first things first, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, is the federal regulators in the real estate arena. And so fair housing law basically says that everyone has a right to live where they choose and can afford, because this is called ready, willing, and able buyer. The able part is not discriminatory. We have to make sure that they're able to afford a $300,000 property, a $600,000 property, a $100,000 property. So before we take anybody out to start looking at properties, we have to make sure, first of all, that they're able to afford the monthly payments and they're able to afford the down payment. So ready, willing, and able is one of the things that you're going to be learning in class. And it is not discriminatory to make sure that everybody has a right to live where they choose and can afford. And one of the things that happened today changes the affordability for people with certain credit scores. We're still just getting a lot of the details, so I'm not going to elaborate too much in this hour class. We'll elaborate much more about it in class, the 75-hour class. But first things first, so this is federal law. Federal law also deals with discrimination. Who's protected, who's not protected. Then we go into state law. Now, one of the things that I'll teach you in my class is that state makes laws and hands those laws down to the city or the counties or townships to enable. This is called the Enabling Act. So state makes law and then hands the law down to the local cities, the local municipalities to enable, to enforce. So the city of Philadelphia, the city of Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, they don't have the right to make law. It has to be on a state regulated platform. And then after the state, and you got your House of Representatives and your state senators who will approve the law, and then the governor will sign it into law for the state. So the governor has kind of the same power as the president in that particular state that the governor holds power. And once the governor signs a bill, it becomes a law. And that's how state law is made. And there's a lot of state law that affects real estate. And there are also these state charges that affect real estate. And so coming into this class, you get to understand these a little bit better. Then you have local law. So Philadelphia, Bucks County, Warren County, Allegheny County, Montgomery County, all have local laws, which are township or city or local laws, and they also have an effect. So one of the first things that you understand is real estate fundamentals. And real estate fundamentals deals with different aspects of different levels of law. The law, all right? So I don't want to get too technical. So that's real estate fundamentals, dealing with all the laws that affect what you can and can't do while you are licensed under the state. And in this situation, it's the state of Pennsylvania for this particular class. And so Pennsylvania has requirements that are different than Jersey. They're different than Delaware. They're different than Florida. So each state has their own licensing requirement. All right. Ohio has a 120-hour licensing requirement compared to Pennsylvania, which has a 75-hour licensing requirement. So each state sets the licensing requirement that's required to get your real estate license in that particular state. Then we got real estate practice. And real estate practice really deals with your business, because once you become licensed, and that was your goal coming to my class to get your real estate license, then you are now running a real estate business. And so this is known as real estate practice. And real estate practice, the state wants to make sure that you understand the language of a contract, how to explain that language of the contract, what forms are required under your licensing requirement, and certain language in a lease, certain language in a contract for an agreement of sale has to comply with state law as well as licensing law. And so the state requires that you understand how to run a real estate business, what you can and cannot do. All right. So we'll talk about when you work with a seller, and then there are different things: exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, net listing, which is not legal in the state of Pennsylvania. And so you would have to understand what you can and cannot do when you represent a seller, what you can and cannot do when you represent a buyer or landlord tenant. Same thing, what you can and can't do. So understanding a lease and what that lease should say, it has to have that quiet enjoyment, which is a legal requirement. What is quiet enjoyment? Has nothing to do with noise. It has everything to do with the right to occupy the property unabated or uninterfered with by anybody else. Third party, the landlord just can't walk into your property anytime they want because they own the building. That lease has to have certain legal language in it so that it has some tenant protection. How do we handle a security deposit? How much can we take the first year? How much can we take the second year? How soon must we give the security deposit back? How do we handle the security deposit? Is the security deposit the same as rent? So this is why the Real Estate Commission requires you to understand these things so that you do everything correct and legally. Otherwise, you can get yourself in trouble. And I might be sneezing here in a second, so forgive me. There it is. All right. So that says it's true. Okay. So sorry about that. So you need to understand the language of a lease. You need to understand the language of an agreement of sale. Your real estate license will allow you to do residential and commercial. You don't need a separate real estate license to do commercial real estate. You don't need a separate real estate license to do residential. Your real estate license will allow you to do both of them. However, you do need an understanding. They're different. They're very different, and you definitely need to have an understanding. And so when you get into the practice of real estate, you really want to specialize. You want to figure out, do I want to start out working with buyers? Do I want to start out working with sellers? Do I want to start working in commercial? Do I want to work with investors? And so you're going to be running a business. And I love it in my class because I really teach you how to run a business, because you have many options. You don't have to just go to work for a brokerage. You can go to work for a Fortune 500 company. You can go to work for franchises. You can go to work for investors, developers, property management. So you have different avenues on how you can proceed with that real estate license. But here's what you do need to know. That real estate license is a golden ticket. It's like a passport to earn income. And once you have a real estate license, you should never be broke. You should never be unemployed. And the reason that I say this is because the real estate license allows you to earn income in the real estate arena. Without the real estate license, technically, you can't work for anybody else. You can't represent anybody else and charge for your services, because now you're practicing real estate without a license. You can't practice medical or medicine without a license. You can't practice law without a license, and you can't practice real estate without a license. And so if you're selling your own property or you're renting out your own property, which means the deed of this property is in your name, then you do not need a real estate license to sell that property or to rent that property out, because the deed's in your name, you own the property. But if you want to help your next door neighbor rent or sell the property for them, and you want to charge the next door neighbor couple hundred, couple $1,000s, then you would be breaking the law. Now you would be practicing real estate without a license. And so understand what you can and cannot do. And investment classes don't really teach you a lot. And here's the other thing about investment books, real quick, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, I'm talking about Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania state law, but a lot of investment books are not written from an autobiographer or an author from the state of Pennsylvania. They might be South Carolina, North Carolina, California, Florida. And so understand what that investment book is telling you to do. You might not be able to do those things in the state of Pennsylvania. So that's why it's very important that you're taking a state required class. This is the best investment if you really want to learn real estate. Even if you don't want to get a real estate license, taking this course is very, very fundamental to your advancement and your understanding of real estate, of what you can and can't do. And plus, you'll now know why real estate agents speak and don't speak, what they can say and can't say. So it'll give you a better understanding, because you might be a little sour at your agent. You will say, well, I did all the talking. My agent didn't do any talking. Well, there's an understanding. This is called contract law. And under contract law, let's say I'm representing you, the buyer, and we go into a property and the owner of that property is there. Technically, I cannot talk to the seller because the seller is under contract with another brokerage. I would have to talk to that seller's broker, agent. I would not be allowed to directly talk to the seller. My client can, because they don't have a real estate license, but I have a real estate license. And because I have a real estate license, I am expected to understand contract law. But my client doesn't understand contract law. So my client doesn't understand why I'm not saying anything, why I'm just sitting there or standing there looking at the moon. They don't understand these. So this is why you have to come to a class to understand before you start getting mad at the loan officer, before you start getting mad at your real estate agent. You'll have to understand that there's a lot of things that you can't do once you're licensed. For instance, one of the first things that I teach you in my class, once you get a real estate license, you'll never be able to buy or sell real estate again without disclosing that you are a licensed real estate professional, right? You bought my property from me. You never told me you had a license. I think you took advantage of me. And chances are you might have, which is the only reason you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You didn't disclose that you were a licensed real estate professional. So this is the purpose of this class. This is what the state wants to make sure that you understand. If you're going to earn income, and that real estate license will allow you to earn income, then you have to have a fundamental understanding of what you can and cannot do in order to earn that income. And so that's why I do this class. I want my students to understand what they're going to be experiencing in the classroom, what fundamentals means, what practice means, why the state requires 75 hours of understanding so that you can go out and represent the public. And that's really the Real Estate Commission's job. The Real Estate Commission is designed to protect the public from us, the licensed real estate professionals. So the Real Estate Commission is oversight, and you have to be licensed. The Real Estate Commission is there to handle any complaints. The Real Estate Commission is there for licensing and relicensing. And the Real Estate Commission is there to protect the public from us. And one of the ways that they do that is by requiring a certain amount of education before you're even allowed to take the state exam. Now, The state has just contracted with a new provider to provide the real estate state exams, and that is now Pearson. It used to be PSI, and now it is now Pearson. And Pearson will be doing state exams, not just for real estate, but for cosmetology, for insurance, for other things as well. So anytime that you're licensed by the state, it's usually some type of testing center that you would have to go to. So if you go to Pearson to get your real estate license, one of the first things that Pearson's going to ask for is your transcript from a school, says that you did your 75-hour requirement, and now you may test. So you just can't walk up to a testing center and take the state exam. You might get lucky and guess right. You might get lucky and know things, but doesn't matter. Without the 75-hour requirement, without the attendance sheet, without the transcript, you're not going to be allowed to take the exam because you don't qualify. So that's what the State Real Estate Commission is there for, to make sure that you have fundamental knowledge so that you can run a business and represent without harming yourself or your clients or customers in this arena. So there is a general overview of why you are coming to a 75-hour class. Now, let's talk about real estate. Notice that I just said client, customer. One of the first things that you're going to learn, maybe not the first thing, but one of the things that you will learn is that there's a difference between a customer and a client. And we owe different services to each. One of the first forms that we have to give everybody, and you'll learn this in my class, and this is a real estate requirement, licensing requirement, is called a consumer notice. It's one of the very first forms, if not the first form, and it should be the first form. But sometimes we like to do numbers to let the seller or the buyer know what they're going to need before we go any further. But once we decide to proceed, then the very first form should be the consumer notice. And the consumer notice deals with customers. And so the consumer is the customer. So on the exam, you very rarely see the word customer. You're going to see the word consumer. And you have to know the difference between a principal and a consumer, or a customer and a client. All right, so it's a different language. And that's another reason that you need to come to this class, to learn the language. Real doctors have their language, lawyers have their language, real estate has their language as well. So we each have our professional language. So a customer is known as a consumer. And the very first form we give them is called the consumer notice, or the customer notice. And the consumer notice explains agency, another real estate word. What is agency? Agency is services or employment. And the consumer notice explains the services that we are allowed to offer under our licensing requirement. Buyer agency, seller agency, dual agency, designated agency. There's a common denominator in this business with the number 4. You'll see the number 4 quite often in this arena. So there are 4 agencies, or 4 types of services, or 4 types of employment that we may offer under our licensing requirement. Let's take each one of them. Seller agency basically means you or your broker only represents the seller. Buyer agent is just the opposite. You or the broker only represent the buyer. Dual agency, the state allows, if your broker allows it, where you can represent, or the broker can represent, both the buyer and the seller. Now, we'll talk about in my class the difference between brokerage dual agency and agent dual agency. But quickly, dual agency basically means you're representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. This is known as dual agency. The state allows it. That's why it's on the consumer notice, but not all brokers will allow it in the office. All right. And so the next one is designated agency, where the broker will designate one agent to represent the buyer, and then the broker will designate another agent to represent the seller. Even though the broker is a dual agent, each individual agent would be a single agent. One's representing the buyer and one's representing the seller. All right. So these are the 4 agencies that you're allowed to do once you have a real estate license. Once again, buyer agency, seller agency, dual agency, and designated agency. When you are doing agency, we're not allowed to charge for the paperwork. We're not allowed to take a retainer. We'll talk about that. An attorney could do that, but we're not allowed to practice law. All right. And so we'll talk about, we can't cross that line in the sand. We have a real estate license. We don't have a medical license. We don't have an accounting's license, and we don't have a law license. So we have to stay within our box. We can't really cross over, because now we're doing something either unethical or illegal, and we have to make sure we know what we can and can't do. So we're not allowed to practice law, but we do have to explain the contract. So we do have to have a fundamental understanding of the contract. So when we are doing agency, when we are representing a client, we're not allowed to charge for the paperwork. But the consumer notice also allows us to do one other thing, which is called transactional licensing. And transactional licensing means we're not representing anybody. We're not representing the buyer. We're not representing the seller. We're only working with a customer under a customer relationship. And so let me give you an example. It's a for sale by owner. The seller advertised the property. A potential buyer went in there. The buyer and the sellers worked it out together, but the title company needs a legal contract that's recognized to transfer the property. And so now either the buyer or the seller come to you, a real estate agent, and ask, could you just do the paperwork for this transaction? That's called transactional licensing. You're not representing the buyer. You're not representing the seller. You're simply doing paperwork so that they can transfer the property legally with the title company. And so the state allows us. So when you have a real estate license, that license is a license to earn income. One of the first things that you will learn is how you can earn that income, what you can and can't do. So the very first form is called a consumer notice. And that's the customer. And we owe the customer or the consumer fair and honest dealing, which means everybody's a customer, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody you talk to, you're at the restaurant, you're at the school, you're at the bowling alley, you're at work. And now everyone that you talk to is a customer or consumer. And we owe them fair and honest dealing. Hey, what's the crime rate in that area? What's the rents going for that area? What's the price? What's the interest rate? And so we don't say to them, oh, what's your social security number, date of birth? No, that's a customer. So the customer, we like to be fair and honest and give them factual information. And it's okay to say, I don't know. If you don't know what the rents are going for in that area, if you're not familiar with the crime rate, it's okay to say, I don't know. You don't want to fake it in this business. That could get you in trouble. So that's called a consumer or a customer. But the next form that we give everybody is called a BRA, a business relationship agreement, either with the buyer or the seller, the landlord or the tenant. And when they signed this form, they went from customer, consumer to client, principal. And now that they are a client under a business relationship agreement, which is known as an employment contract, we'll talk about that later. Now we owe the client legal responsibilities, which is called fiduciary obligations or fiduciary responsibility. And there are 6 known legal responsibilities that the Real Estate Commission wants you to understand: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, recordability. All right. So when we're representing a client, they went from a customer to a client because they're now allowing us to represent them. Now it's a different level. So they're no longer a customer, which is only fair and honest dealing. Now they're a client, and now we have legal responsibility to the client. And so that is another reason that you have to understand how to run a real estate business. Who's the customer? Who's the client? And so one of the first things, not the very first thing, but one of the first things that you learn is the forms that you're going to need as a real estate agent. One of those forms is called the CN, a consumer notice. One of the other forms that I just talked about is that business relationship agreement. And we'll talk about it. It's either a listing contract or a buyer agency agreement. And there's three. The state wants you to understand all three: the exclusive right to sell, the exclusive agency, and the open listing, or just the opposite for the buyer: exclusive right to represent a buyer, non-exclusive, or an open with the buyer. We'll talk about that more in the correct terminology of these three contracts in the class. But this is one of the things why I do this class, to try to give you a fundamental understanding of what you're going to be experiencing in the class. Now, one of the other things that you're going to learn immediately is, who do you represent? Because I just talked to you about having a contract, which is known as an agency agreement, or also known as an employment contract. Agency agreement, employment contract. Who do you represent? So you're a real estate agent, you just got your license, and you're now with ABC Brokerage. Who do you represent under this employment contract or this agency agreement? And the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, you represent the broker. You represent the broker. The broker represents the client. And it doesn't matter if this client is your sphere of influence, which most likely it will be when you first start out. The client's either going to be mom, dad, brother, sister, son, daughter, cousin, uncle, nephew, something like that. And so even though it might be somebody close to you, that you're now helping somebody out, you're starting a new business, they like to be a first-time home buyer, and so it's a good combination, it's not your client. Even though it might be blood, even though it might be a family, it might be a friend, it's not your client. It is the brokerage that you work for. It is the broker's client. So one of the things that you need to understand when you have a real estate license is the difference between a real estate agent, the difference between an associate broker, and the difference between a broker of record. So 3 steps. And you'll start out as a real estate agent. And if you ever decide to go for your broker's license, like your associate broker, which probably will be coming next, you have to be a real estate agent for 3 years before you are allowed to go for your broker's license. And since we're all overachievers, since we always want to climb the ladder and do better, then chances are you will go for your broker's license in the 3-year period. But you would have to know, in the state of Pennsylvania, you have to be a real estate agent for 3 years. You need to have so many credits and so many hours before you're allowed to go for your broker's license. We'll talk more about that in the class. But after 3 years of being a real estate agent, you can now achieve associate broker. Then after associate broker, you might want to be having your own brokerage office where you are now training, you are now teaching, you are now running the business, and it's all your responsibility. All the weight comes on your shoulder. This is called broker of record. And the only one that you can receive compensation from, and the only one that can give compensation, is the broker of record. You can't be paid by the client directly. That's a RESPA violation under HUD, under the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. RESPA means Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about TRID. We'll talk about the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Other things, these are laws. But under RESPA, you're not allowed to take any money from the client. You're not allowed to take any kickback from a contractor like a landscaper, a mortgage company, a home inspector, a towing company if you're doing property management. So you're going to have to understand who you can receive compensation from and who you can't, or you're jeopardizing your real estate license. So in the state of Pennsylvania, once you're licensed, the only one that you're allowed to receive the compensation from is the broker of record. And again, that's who you represent. You don't represent the client, not until the day comes where you are the broker of record. So it doesn't matter if your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, or your daughter, it is not your client. It is the broker's client. You represent the brokerage. The brokerage represents the client. So this is what you need to understand. And this is what happens in this classroom, so you get a fundamental understanding. So we just talked about a form called the consumer notice. We just talked about the difference between a customer and a client. which is also known as the consumer or the principal. We just talked about who you can receive compensation from and who you can't. Let's talk about some other things like the difference between deed and title, because you hear this all the time. Deed and title. What's the difference? Well, we don't sell property by title. We might sell vehicles by title, but we don't sell property by title. We sell property by deed. And the deed is the written instrument. The deed is what transfers the property. This would be known as delivery and acceptance. So when we finally get to the settlement table and the seller hands the deed over to the buyer and the buyer accepts it, this is called delivery and acceptance. And there's a bunch of formalities that should have taken place to make sure that the deed is good and marketable. But this is called delivery and acceptance. Once the seller delivers the deed across the table to the buyer and the buyer accepts it, the buyer becomes the owner of the property at that moment. That is the moment, not through the whole contract, not when they made an offer, not when the offer was accepted, but when the deed is delivered by the seller to the buyer and the buyer accepts the deed. It is at that moment that the ownership transfers hands and the buyer becomes the owner of the property. And of course, there's a lot of formality, especially if they're getting a mortgage, a payoff, a mortgage satisfaction. We'll talk about the chronological order of all these things in the class, what has to take place. We have to make sure there's no liens, no judgment. Is the seller the owner of the property, and so forth. So the deed, the deed, the deed, the deed. And that's a ring that I do. And most of my students, you look at my reviews, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear a lot of that little jingle, the deed, the deed, the deed. This is what you as a real estate agent are going to be very specifically inclined. We're going to talk about the bundle of legal rights. And as a real estate agent, we don't really care about how the property looks. That's the buyer and the seller. All right, the buyer cares about it. But what we care about is, can the buyer legally take ownership of the property? Is the seller the legal owner? Is there any liens in judgment? Can the buyer do with this property they want to do after they purchase it? For instance, the buyer says to you, this property is zoned residential, but the buyer says, I'm going to turn this property into an apartment complex, a duplex, or I'm going to turn this property into a rooming house. Now, legally, they could not do that because the property is zoned one way. It's zoned residential. And they could not legally convert the property. And if you did not advise them of this, then you would be negligent and you could get sued later on because you did not stop, you did not interfere, you did not disclose that they could not buy this property and turn it into a rooming house or a duplex unless they understood variance and zoning and what would be required to change this from a residential property to a duplex. And this is, again, why you're taking this class, because, again, we're transferring a deed and the property is zoned one way. That's all the buyer can use it for, is how the property is currently zoned, unless they're able to get the zoning changed. Now, this is called the deed. But what is title, right? Again, I just told you we don't transfer property by title, we transfer property by deed. The deed is the written instrument and the deed transfers the property. But what is title? Title is a process of making sure the deed is good. Title search, abstract the title, title commitment, title insurance, title certificate, lawyer's opinion of title. So all these things are a process from beginning to end to make sure that the deed is good and marketable. And I'll teach you the contract, I'll teach you the agreement of sale, and you're not going to see that we transfer property by title. We transfer property by deed, but title, from the title search to the abstract of title to a title certificate to title insurance. It's a process of making sure the deed is good. So there's the difference between deed and title as we go along. We just talked about who you represent. You don't represent the client. Even though you're under an agency agreement, an employment contract, that contract is not with you and them. the contract is with the brokerage that you are representing or that you are affiliated with. So the broker represents the client. You represent the brokerage. All right. So these are fundamental understandings that you get to understand. Now, there's a lot of other things that we talk about, like earnest money and deposit. And so there's a difference. A lot of people don't understand the difference. And earnest money is between the borrower and the lender. So if you're getting a mortgage to buy the property and the lender wants skin in the game, which is called a down payment of 20%, what we're saying here is you can buy this $100,000 property if you can put 20% down. We, the lender, will give you $80,000 mortgage to buy this $100,000 property, providing you're putting $20,000 earnest money into this deal. So earnest money is between the borrower and the lender. You're not going to see earnest money on our contracts. Now, they're constantly revising the contract. I have a problem with the new contract, so we're probably not going to use it because you're not supposed to have double negatives or exception to exceptions in a contract. And we have a little bit of a problem with a brand new contract that just comes out. So we'll talk about that in the class. But again, we can't have these things. So earnest money is between the borrower and the lender. But deposit, and that's what we deal with in the real estate arena, ladies and gentlemen. That's what our contract says. First deposit, maybe a second deposit. Doesn't say earnest money, and there's no such thing as earnest money deposit. Doesn't exist. It's like putting salt and pepper together and calling it pepper. Pepper doesn't exist. There's salt and there's pepper, but there's no pepper. There's earnest money and there's deposit, but there's no earnest money deposit. That's putting two things together. So deposit is between the buyer and the seller. Earnest money is between the borrower and the lender, but deposit is between the buyer and the seller. And so now you need a separate understanding of what earnest money is and what deposit is. And so you've got a lot of these things that we talk about. We'll talk about protected classes. Who's protected? Who's not? A person who is an illegal drug user with not trying to be comical or funny. Let's take a person who does cocaine or a person who does a crack and sometimes notoriously known as a crackhead, but not trying to be offensive or funny. But this individual who is using illegal drugs is not a protected class under federal law, state law, or local law. However, if this individual is in some type of recovery program, now they do fall under the status of protected class. And so now I could be discriminatory and say, I'm not selling my property or renting my property to you because you are an illegal drug user. You're not protected. And that's not discrimination. But if this person tells me that they're in some kind of a recovery program, all bets are off. And I can no longer discriminate because they're now a protected class. And so under fair housing law and under state and federal law, we have to understand who's a protected class and who's not. Is the 55 and over community a protected class? Is the 62 and over community protected class? Is 40 and over a protected class in the state or in the nation? So again, you need to understand these things under your licensing requirement. Familiar status, all right? And so this is a big discrimination in the real estate arena. Oh, you got 5 children? Yeah, I'm sorry, we don't have no available units. Now we're steering them away from a property that they could legally take because we're telling them that there's no available vacancy when there is vacancy. That is illegal. That's called steering. Or we tell them, oh, 5 children? Well, we can only put you on the first floor. Children are noisy. We can't put you on the second or third floor. That is also illegal. That is also known as steering, or as it's old common law known segregation. You're trying to segregate them. You're trying to steer. I don't think you'll be comfortable in this neighborhood. Why don't you let me take you to a neighborhood where I think you'd be more comfortable with? That is discrimination. That is illegal. That is called steering and completely illegal under federal law and state law. So now you need to know what you can and cannot do. Can I not let a family of 5 children with 1 or 2 parents take a 1-bedroom apartment? I can. I can prevent that from happening because of fire code. Too many people in a 1-bedroom. But could I prevent them from moving into a 2-bedroom apartment? No. Now they have a legal right, and I would be discriminating against them on this grounds. So understand the 1-bedroom apartment compared to the 2-bedroom apartment and fire code. All right. So this is what you're learning in this class, ladies and gentlemen, things that you can and cannot do with a fundamental understanding. And there are many, many, many more things, but I'm just touching on a few things that I like to talk about. So contract law, because we didn't talk about contract law, but you're now representing the buyer. That means there's a few things that you can and cannot do. And if we're taking that buyer to see a property and the owner is there, can we talk to the owner? And the owner talk to us? Who can start a conversation? Who cannot? When do we cross the line? Can I give my business card to the seller? All right. Who can I give my business card to? These are the things that you need to understand because, again, you will have a license by the state, and this license tells you what you can and can't do. Now, if you want to make serious money, ladies and gentlemen, on a part-time basis or a full-time basis, then it's always been in real estate. Even during the pandemic, we were essential. The governor did not stop us from working in the pandemic. Other businesses were closed down. Other people were not allowed to go to work, but we were essential in the real estate arena. During the pandemic, during the Great Depression, during wartime, real estate has always been a viable business, no matter what, good times and bad times. Why? Because 2 things people will always need, ladies and gentlemen: food and shelter. 2 basic human needs: food and shelter. And understand, in certain states, they're given tent owners who are known as homeless legal rights under the tent. Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? With legal rights comes legal responsibility. Will these homeless shelters that are now in tents, and now the city is saying that you cannot harm them, you can't force them, you can't move them under a legal right that the state or the city might enforce, do they pay taxes? Is that real estate? Does it change? Can I now sell a tent? These are things that will come down the line, ladies and gentlemen, because every time new rules, new laws are put into place, it affects our real estate business. Today, we learned about the Biden administration's efforts to make people homeowners, even if their credit is not warranting a mortgage. So let's just say they have a FICO score of below 640. I won't go specific, but below 640. Well, let's just say that they were buying a $300,000 property and they needed $10,000 to buy this $300,000 property because of their low credit. But now, effective today, that low credit score is awarded. Now, instead of $10,000, they're only going to need $7,000, just as an example, a general example. All right. But if you have over a 740 FICO score, you've done everything in your power to have a great credit score. Now, as of today, May 1st, 2023, you will be penalized. And let's just say that you needed $1,300 net, or your mortgage payments are $1,300. Now your mortgage payments may be $1,500 or $1,600, just as a general barometer, because the good credit score now has to pay for the lower credit score. Is this fair? We could talk about that all day long, ladies and gentlemen. Will it stay into effect? You know, it's conversation piece, basically. but it is in effect as of today. And when these things change, like today, that affects us in the real estate business. Now, we now have to learn what's going on, and we now have to explain. You'll see a lot of advertisements soon where real estate agents don't quite understand it. And they're going to say, if you're a first time buyer with low or no credit, you'll have a better chance of getting a property than somebody with a 740 or above. That probably will not be correct. And we'll talk about that in the class as well. What you can say and can't say in your advertisement. Trigger terms. We can't use financial terms in our real estate flyer. And this could cross the line. This is why it's very important that you understand earnest money, because a lot of agents don't understand earnest money. And when they use EMD or earnest money, they're actually using a financial term, which is known as a trigger term, in their real estate marketing, which could get them in trouble. And so that's why it's very important to understand. This is what my class does, ladies and gentlemen. I really designed my school to be more than just a prep to pass the real estate exam. And not to belittle or degrade any of my competition or my competitors, but in all honesty, that's really what they're designed to do. They're designed to prep you to pass a real estate exam. Now, that's basically the fundamentals of this structure. But my school goes beyond that, ladies and gentlemen. My school is designed to teach you how to run a real estate business. My school is designed to teach you how to invest in property legally and ethically. So what's the difference between legal and ethics? Well, legal is law and ethics is your behavior and how you act, how you react, how you behave. So this is known as ethics. And you could perform legally, yet not ethically, which means you didn't break any laws, but your behavior certainly has a lot to be desired. And this is called ethics. And so I will teach you how to invest in property legally and ethically so that nobody's harmed. You don't have to take advantage of somebody. Oh, you're behind on your mortgage. Oh, I could do you a square. I could do this. It's an estate program. You don't want the property. What we want to make sure is that there's lots of money to be made in the real estate arena, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need to take advantage of anybody in order to make money. There's plenty of money in the real estate arena. So that's what my school does. It will teach you how to represent, how to run a real estate business. It'll teach you to understand the language of the contract so that you understand what good and marketable title means. All right. I'll teach you the home inspection, the 3 stages, 10 days for stage 1, 5 days for stage 2, 2 days for stage 3. Lots of agents don't understand that part of the contract. And the contract does change. And because the contract changes to keep up laws, you need to do a continuing education class every 2 years as well to continue. If you're licensed in anything, if you're an accountant, you're a cosmetologist, you're an insurance agent, you're a real estate agent, as long as you're licensed by the state, you will have to do a continuing education no matter what it is. So don't think it's unfair that you have to do a continuing education. You have to. We got new presidents, we got new administrations. Today, new laws go into effect and it affects you. And it affects the way that you communicate the new laws, the new changes with your customer and your client. And for this reason, we have to do a continuing education class to make sure that we are staying up and we are current with changes that take place quite often in our world and in the real estate arena. All right. So that's what my class does. Plus, I also go on a little bit of a different level. Math. Everybody does a psychological trigger. And you say to yourself, I'm not good at math, or I'm new, I've never done this before, or I'm not good at testing. That is a program, and you now just convinced yourself to fail. You just programmed yourself to do less than your optimal. The minute that you say, I'm not good at this, I'm new at this, I don't feel comfortable doing that, then you are already programming yourself to be less successful. And so I'll teach you that. It's a psychology trigger. So math is easy. It's just that, unfortunately, we don't really learn math in our curriculum today. And don't take my word for it. You can look at statistics. We'll talk about that because students ask me, what's your pass fail ratio? So if we go by public schools in different cities, you can see that their pass fail ratio when it comes to math is very low, very low. And so you do not have the fundamental understanding of math until you come into my class and I teach you how easy math is. Math, 3 variables. Once you know your 3 variables, you can do math all day long. But to prove to you that you're good at math, when it comes to our money, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter. We're good at math when it comes to our money. Isn't it amazing that you just said you're not good at math, but when it comes to your money, math is not an issue, is it? All right, so I'll teach you the very easy way of doing math, especially real estate math, amortization, proration, and so forth. We'll talk about that more later. Commission, mills, and so forth. We'll talk about all these things later. Not hard once you get a fundamental understanding of it. And then I'm also going to teach you memory techniques. We got short-term memory, and then we have long-term memory. And once I teach you how to use your long-term memory, things are much, much easier. It's very easy to pass an exam. It's very easy to memorize the things that you're learning once I teach you how to compartmentalize it from short-term memory to long-term memory. All right. Now, already 53 minutes. I got 7 minutes left as my clock is letting me know. See how fast this goes, ladies and gentlemen? And so my class hopefully will go comfortably for you. You'll learn a lot. I'm hoping that this free class that I did introduced you to me. I am Warren Nelson. I will be your instructor. This is my school that you see behind me, Online Real Estate School Incorporated. .com. Now I say .com because we got a new website that'll be coming up. My website's probably not up and running just yet, but I'm redoing it. And that's another thing. You constantly got to redo your marketing, the websites and so forth. And so maybe tomorrow, the Online Real Estate School Incorporated.com, you can go online and see my new website that'll be probably popping up later on tonight or tomorrow. Again, Online Real Estate School Incorporated. When you put in Online Real Estate School Incorporated, I'm going to pop up in your search engine. I'm going to be the top 3 schools always, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, in the state of Pennsylvania, other states as well, but we'll just talk about Pennsylvania for right now. And I'm going to teach you how to be top of the search engine. You don't have to pay for SEOs or anything like that. We'll talk about these things in my class because you're going to be running a real estate business. And because you're going to be running a real estate business, you want people, when they search for you, to be able to find you. So we'll talk about that in my class. So Online Real Estate School Incorporated, ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 classes. My next class starts May 9th. And then I'll only be running one more class this year, which will be in September. So May 9th is my next class. You do have to be signed up by May 7th so that I have an attendance sheet. Harrisburg has everything. I can get your ebook out to you, and then we have you all set up. On May 8th, we're going to have an orientation class, a 1-hour class. It won't probably even be an hour. It's just to make sure that you understand how to operate Zoom, or here it is, Zoom here, Zoom, because this is the platform that we're going to be using. The only difference is all of you will be in the background. We'll all see each other. We'll all be able to talk with each other. You can talk to me. I can talk to you through the Zoom platform. So it doesn't matter if you're in Harrisburg, you're in Pittsburgh, you're in Scranton, you're in Collegeville, you're in Philadelphia. It doesn't matter. If you're in Pennsylvania, even if you're not in Pennsylvania, let's say you're in Ohio, you're in New Jersey, you're in New York, and you want a Pennsylvania license, well, now you can attend this class through this, which we call distant education platform. So you can be at a distance and still be able to get licensed and understand how to run a business through the Zoom platform. I also run my real estate brokerage through a Zoom platform because nobody wants to go to work anymore. That'll change, but for right now, nobody wants to go to work. Everybody wants to stay at home. Everybody wants to get rich quick. And real estate is one of those really good avenues that you can pursue to make a lot of money. So, morning class starting May 9th, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I run my class 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. My morning class is 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And it'll be 4 weeks for real estate fundamental. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 9 to 1 for 4 weeks. And then the following month, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 9 to 1, it'll be 4 weeks for real estate practice. That's called my morning class from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We do take a half-hour break. I also run an evening class, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., the same 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, starting May 9th. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday for my evening class, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., 4 weeks for real estate fundamental, and then 4 weeks for real estate practice. Because this is a Zoom platform, ladies and gentlemen, I don't run a weekend class and I don't do a 1 month class. Those classes that are 3-week classes, they're basically designed just to prep you to pass an exam. It's up to you if you want to spend that money. You ever buy a cheap sofa, ladies and gentlemen? You ever buy a cheap sofa? And then you find yourself having to buy another cheap sofa not too long after that you bought that cheap sofa because it didn't last very long, did it? And so that's the same thing with your education. If you want to go cheap with your education, expect to get what you pay for. And so most schools, like a 3-week class or the weekend classes, they're not designed to teach you how to run a real estate business. They're designed by the model to prep you so that you understand what to expect when you take the state exam so that you have a higher chance of passing the state exam. But as I said, my school is going to go a lot different, right? Now, the reason that I do 4-hour classes with a half-hour break is because they're just long enough that you don't get bored, you don't lose your focus, and you can stay fundamentally focused on the material that you're going to be receiving in my class. So the design that I have with a 4-hour class really is the premium option. And yes, it's an 8-week class, but in this 8 weeks, I go beyond just prepping you to pass an exam. I'm going to teach you how to invest, how to run a business, and other things as well. So my name is Warren Nelson, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you have appreciated the class. I did see the comments coming in, but because I'm a one-man show, I'll get to the comments later. I don't want to really interrupt the class. This is my free live streaming class that I do to introduce to you one of the fundamentals that you can expect when you start a school, when you register for a school. Is my style good to your learning curve? So this is why I do this free class. Why other schools don't do it, I don't know, but I do it. So I run the class. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll send you out a text. When I get the message back to stop, I'll take you off my list. I'm not there to bother you. I'm there to let you know something's coming up. And so if you say stop, that's all you have to do, and you'll never hear from me again. Not everybody wants to take a school. Some were just looking for more information. And so once I send that information, I have your database, I have your contact, so I'll let you know I got a free class coming up. But I don't want to bother you, ladies and gentlemen, just trying to let you know what's coming up. You don't want no more emails or no more text from me. All you have to do is say one time, stop, and I will take you off my list. It's not there to pester you. I'm there to let you know certain things are coming up. The thing that's coming up with this class, ladies and gentlemen, and what I told you, is because you're in this class, and I'm just doing it for just about everybody for my May class, you get to take a $50 discount. So instead of it being $299, it's only $249 for the class. And don't worry about it if you already paid the $299. Don't worry about it. You will see how I'm going to work that out for you. But everybody for my May class, it's going to be $249. And I'm going to show you how to save another $50 in my class when you become a student. So it'll be really $100 savings right off the bat, and probably even more. But for my May 9th class, ladies and gentlemen, instead of it being $299, you only need $249. You can take this $50 savings that I'm offering for the May class. And I wanted to do my introduction to you so you get to see me, hear me, see my style, and take advantage of my discounts that I give so often, which is another reason I'm changing the website, because I spontaneously give discounts, and my website wasn't designed for my spontaneous discount. So we had to change that to give you a new code so that you can enjoy the discounts that I sporadically do. It's a labor of love. As I said, I don't really make a lot of money in the school, but it's a labor of love. Okay, last thing, pass fail ratio. All right, a lot of my students ask, what's your pass fail ratio? And I had to do a little research on this, to be honest with you, because it's not really given to us fundamentally. And so you have to understand your students and who has passed their exam and who hasn't. And I found something interesting when I was doing this research. My baby boomer generation and my Generation X has an 86% pass fail ratio. My Generation Y students have an 82% pass fail ratio. My millennial generation has a 79% pass fail ratio, and my Generation Z has a 73% pass fail ratio. I found that very interesting when I did my research. So as you can see, and we'll talk about the different generation, all right? If you're 50 and 60 years old, you're one generation. If you're 30 and 40, you're a different generation. If you're 20 and 30, if you're 18 to 25, you're a different generation. So we got baby boomer generation, Generation X, Generation Y, millennial generation, Generation Z, and we'll talk about that. But it's a different pass fail ratio, and I'm going to work on that because now I took note of it, and I want to make sure that I can make this class understandable for younger as well as older individuals. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. I am Warren Nelson. This is Online Real Estate School Incorporated. This is my free class that I do every Monday between 6 and 7. I am now going over my time as I'm being told. So that is it. Take advantage of my next class, starts May 9th. You got to be enrolled by May 7th. Take advantage of the $50 discount. Plus, I'll give you another $50 discount if you are enrolled in this class. We'll talk about that later. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in my class. And I'm looking forward to making you a licensed real estate professional this year. Be safe, be healthy, be happy. I'll see you when I see you. Thank you for coming to my class. Enjoy your evening, ladies and gentlemen.